Friends, allies, and Americans, welcome to the Defense of Democracy podcast, where we tell the stories of folks who defend your children's rights by advocating for inclusive public school systems and who fight for diversity across our nation. I'm your host, Karen Swoboda. Let's get into it. Today on the Defense of Democracy podcast, it is my pleasure to welcome James Haslam and Glenn Harris, who are with Race Forward. James is the Senior Organizing Director, and Glenn, you are the President, Executive Director of Race Forward. Thank you both for joining me on the show. It's a pleasure to have you here today.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
I would love if you could take a moment, and James, we can start with you, and just tell me a little bit about your background and your organization.
Happy to. Again, thanks, Karen, for having us on. Thanks for all the work of Defense of Democracy. I super appreciate everything you do. I'm been an organizer, a community organizer, labor organizer, political organizer now for close to a quarter century. Time flies. But I now work as the Senior Organizing Director at Race Forward on a project called Heal Together, which HEAL it's an acronym for Honest Education, Action, and Leadership. And it's a national school district organizing initiative that Race Forward launched in 2022 publicly as a national effort. And we work now with organizers, educators, students, school board members all over the country, doing aligned work with Defense of Democracy, building a movement for pro-equity, pro-public education policies, so public education can serve as the foundation for democracy, which I'm happy to talk to you all about today.
Thank you. And Glenn, same for you.
Thank you, Karen. And thank you for having us on. Likewise, really appreciate the work you all have been doing in the world. Glenn Harris at Race Forward for the last 6 years. Come out of a background of likewise community organizing, grassroots philanthropy, and local government. And at Race Forward, we really function at the intersection of racial justice and governance. I like to use, to make it simple, I'd like to use Vincent Harding, civil rights activist, asked this question: is America possible? Is a just multiracial democratic society possible? And, I think at the core of our work, we spent the last 42 years trying to answer that question.
Absolutely. And obviously our organizations, and in particular your Heal Together project, are very aligned in because we have seen, and I believe it was 2022 when James approached us about that toolkit that you have, which is actually really amazing. But before we get into that, let's take I would love a broader statement about what do you consider the role of, because I get this all the time, the role of public education in supporting a just multiracial democracy.
We say it all the time that public education is the cornerstone of democracy. And there's no question about it. As we think about what public schools serve, they play the function where we get to literally practice democracy in real time, right? Get to know what it means to be working with other people, practice ideas of pluralism, practice ideas of being able to wrestle with difference. So I think in some very fundamental ways, there is no real democracy without a space that allows for that kind of public sharing, public understanding of who we be collectively. For us as an organization that focuses on racial justice, we're really clear that there is no real democracy without racial justice. And that we also can't get to racial justice without a real functioning democracy. And so public schools, in our mind, are invaluable. It is why with civil rights movement, public schools were, such a critical cornerstone in thinking about ideas of integration and ultimately around ideas of where we get to practice racial equity and the possibilities of becoming that just multiracial democracy. democratic society.
So do you like in my view the attack on the public school system has been happening for a longer time than I think it was in the forefront of people's understanding, but it is absolutely not an accident. And just watching it as a parent, um it seems like this was very insidious, targeted, coordinated, and smart, right? Because people weren't necessarily watching the school board meetings and didn't quite realize what could happen when you overturn, when a bunch of people who are fascists overturn a school board. James, a question for you. Recognizing public education as a public good, talk to me about how the public education system, how important it is that every child in our country have access to a well-funded um, public education system with educators who are educated and know their stuff and know their background, rather than say the individual parent, because we get a lot of quote parents' rights and the difference between parents' rights and public education. I don't know if I'm forming that question correctly, but do what you can.
Yeah, no, it's such an interesting question, Karen. As Glenn was saying, this is so pivotal for where we are right now. As a country that is been through the history that we've been in, and we're at this historical moment we're in right now. That the conversation about what do we want public education to be, what have we wanted it to be, why did we start it in the first place, and that history that has been and sometimes attacked in communities teaching
Mhm.
about this project. As Glenn said, like, how can we make this American democracy work for everybody? It wasn't set up to be that way originally. It has always been the promise that has been part of the struggle to achieve those visions that were put forward as the values for our country, and have always been sought after, but has been a project. So that question about how do we get there,
Mhm.
to me, at this point, it's hard to really imagine any other way to get to the country we want to get to without a public education system that is providing high quality education and opportunities for every single child in this country, so that we can have the tools to be able to take on not only the things we're facing right now, but for future generations. And by having a public education system that brings everyone together from every walk of life together, a multiracial education system,
Mhm.
that has always been the promise of having the ideals of our country fulfilled in reality. And the efforts, what we're up against now, what you were talking about, there are powerful forces now. There's been powerful forces at every moment in our country's history trying to prevent that, trying to keep people divided across different lines, certainly racial lines, but
Mhm.
driving wedges between people, because that when we have policies that benefit the very rich and powerful, a democracy can hold that accountable. A democracy can make more fair policies. It might be good for everybody, but might be a little bit more fair in terms of how things are happening now. So that's the heart of where we're at.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Do you want, I mean, there is obviously, as a parent, and most of my followers have children, and their concerns are immediately for their children. And when we say marginalized communities, we're talking about communities of color, communities of different religion. We're talking about children who have disabilities, and the quality of education they can get. Um, and we're talking about like kids like mine who come from a Christian family, but I don't necessarily want them only to learn their own narrow view of the world. So it really is more than just the individual child or the individual family that ends up being damaged by the destruction of the public school system. It is the entire community that ends up suffering. Do either one of you want to comment on that?
Yeah, Karen, I think you said it beautifully, which is, um, public good is an idea about, is the thing in front of us, to your point, is it most important for our community or for me as an individual, right? I mean, that's all we're naming. And I think for public schools, what we're naming is that it's critical, not only like in all the ways we've named about our kids getting exposure to the whole, about our kids having an opportunity to engage in space that is new, different, that really represents the possibilities, like I was saying, pluralism. Like, we don't have to be in exact agreement, but we can all be in agreement that we want our communities to thrive. And and literally, kids practice that on playgrounds in public schools. You know what I'm saying?
Oh
So
yeah.
I think that idea is absolutely fundamental for anyone who's thinking about these issues. The other thing is just practical terms. What we know is that strong public schools mean strong neighborhoods. What we
Mhm.
know is strong public schools mean stronger economy. Like,
Mhm.
there are tangible benefits, real, about why our public school systems matter. They still are the central hub in every community in this country around what we mean by community or neighborhood. And so I think in so many ways, when we think about what is the collective benefit, not just my individual desires, needs, and
Mhm.
hopes, there's no question about the role that public schools play in building, genuinely meaningful sense of.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So tell me a little bit, and maybe James, you can answer this, but the actions that Race Together and your toolkit, your Heal Together toolkit, Race Forward, I'm sorry, and Heal Together toolkit are providing, and why these tools are important, and tell us a little bit about them and how people can get to them.
Yeah, thanks so much, Karen. Um, so Heal Together is a organizing initiative, and so we see, a lot of what the our job is to support parents, support community members, support students, support educators, support school board members, support all of the stakeholders. Really, as Glenn and you were saying, this schools are the not just for the people who are currently enrolled in them. They are a resource for for us being able to create the communities that we want to have in the future and future generations. And so we're really all stakeholders in them. And so partly what we're trying to do is equip communities, equip the key stakeholders to be able to have the tools, to be able to have strong public schools, to have people engaged in support. I mean, it's a beautiful place for a democratic society to have these public schools that are really training grounds for democracy. They're not only what is happening in the classroom, teaching the future generations the skills that they need to be civic leaders and engage in a meaningful civic life, but they're all the way down ballot. That's where school boards are in most communities elected. There's open public meetings. They're a way to engage and participate, and so it's where our communities kind of start off with that democracy. And so if we don't engage in it, it's like our democracy. We don't vote if people don't come out. It doesn't work as it's supposed to do. So the toolkits that we have are giving people strategies on how to get more people involved, how to think about all the different people in their community, do that kind of community mapping to make sure that all communities, parts of our communities, are being invited to be engaged and to be part of this, to be able to make sure that we have strong participation in the school boards, that we have good people running for school boards, that we keep good people elected, that support equity, that support strong public schools, providing high quality education. We keep those people there. We support them when they're in there around on the school boards. So folks can go. We have a healtogether.org website. You go /toolbox. You'll get to our toolkit. You'll find it on there. But there's a PDF and some other resources to be able to come down. We're always trying to add case studies of how parents, how students, how educators have done this in their community and successful examples of it, so people don't have to recreate. We have nearly 14,000 school districts in this country, so we're trying to make it easier for people to have the tools to have an organizing culture around their public schools.
And that also brings to mind the fact that Race Forward is, as a coalition partner with Defense of Democracy, we're always kind of saying, we don't care who gets across the finish line as long as somebody is like moving forward, like you guys are doing. And I just want to point out to anyone who's listening, if they were to go to your website, raceforward.org, you have all kinds of assistance, support, not just for individuals, but for other organizations. It is about reaching, others who are doing the same work, because it's not we're not funded like the way that Moms for Liberty and other of these, heavily politically backed and funded organizations have. So we have each other, and that's how we make this happen. Now, speaking of that, I always like to, about halfway through the podcast, do a volunteer shout out. And I know that both of our organizations have one individual in common. And I was wondering if, James, you wanted to say a little bit about this individual.
Yeah, there's, it's funny, that toolkit I was just mentioning, we put it together when we were trying to take on this project of like how to support this organizing all over the country, because it's needed everywhere and it's a local level. And it really is equipping people who are doing this work as volunteers. We put together this toolkit and we put it out in the world, and we were hoping people would use it. We'd follow up, we'd share it. And there was this one guy that when he came to our first national meeting, he had printed it out, this PDF, made it into a binder, and it had been like well worn, clearly been using it really actively all over South Carolina. So I wanted to give a shout out to AJ Davis, Anjane Davis, founder of Low Country Black Parents Association. It's a partner, Heal Together, partner of Defense of Democracy, and just an incredible leader in his community, doing just incredible work for his kids, his family, his community, but it's having a ripple effect across the state, across this country. Thank you so much, AJ, for everything you do.
I cannot agree with you more. I'm so glad we had this individual in common. He is fantastic. Glenn, talk to me about what has been the most challenging thing in your mission to move Race forward right now in these days.
Yeah. Well, we're a week out from an election in which I think many of these issues are, front and center on the ballot. Biggest challenge has been the pushback in the last few years. And we entered into this conversation directly around public schools when the attacks on quote unquote critical race theory within public schools came up. And just really recognizing the way in which historically we started here. Race has been used as a wedge to divide us. And so, it's one of the things we don't talk about is that historically, not just public schools, but public good, prior to the 1960s, public institutions were greatly respected by people across the country. Government was greatly appreciated. And what happened in the wake of integration, in the wake of civil rights, was really what came out of the South, which was a fundamental pushback against the idea of integration and the idea of public good as a result. And so, I think for us, this is both new, this moment, and if we're honest, it's just a repeat of what we've been doing for the last 280 years in this country.
Yes.
And so, but what feels possible in this moment is really truly imagining a different path. And, we're naming AJ, but, in looking at and thinking about you, Karen, and the work that you've been doing, that folks are really stepping up to own their schools, to own what it means. And this is why that's so important to us, for folks who've been working on racial justice, racial equity work, and just the idea of a just society for the last 42 years, is because we really believe that's only going to happen locally. And I think we forget this, right? That the civil rights movement, yes, it was a national movement, but that's not how it started. It started local. It was a movement in Selma, that
Yep.
the justice we're looking for, the democracy we're looking for, it's practiced right in our own backyards.
Mm.
And so what's been really exciting for us, even despite the challenge, is watching how folks locally have really stepped up to say, no, public schools are ours. You're not going to use the same old okey doke to try to get us to separate ourselves as communities. And
I
so
yeah.
that's been the exciting part.
I've said it multiple times that the client of the public school system is the public, right? It's not
Yeah.
the individual. It is the public. It's for the public good. That's why it's here. Well, you bring up a good point. So we are actually pre-recording this podcast, but it will launch on Tuesday, November 5th. So as this podcast is coming out, people are going to be out casting their votes. There is an enormous concern about the future of democracy in our country. Certainly as of this moment, a week before the election, there's really no way to confidently call it in one direction or the other, which is upsetting. But but it's true. You can't get away from the reality of it. What's your message? And I'll turn to James this time. What do you think is the message that we should be giving to people who are desperately worried about the outcome of this election? And what if Donald Trump is elected? And what if Kamala Harris is elected? Two different scenarios, but not all that different. I don't think there's any scenario where the three of us fold up our tables and say, okay, well, we're going to go do something totally else because this isn't a problem anymore. What message do you have for those people sitting online voting or just cast their vote and waiting to find out?
Yeah, no, it's such an important question, and you're absolutely right that while things will be dramatically different by what happens in many respects, like it's what's at stake at the top of the ticket and oftentimes all the way down is going to make a big difference. So there's a good reason why so many people are working so hard to have good outcomes happen at the election. But while there's differences in outcomes, what we do next is very similar, right? It means that we have to organize and organize just as hard as people are working now. I mean, it'd be nice in a different world, if we could just worry about the election and then not have to worry about it until the next election. But unfortunately, the election really is kind of the starting gate for what comes next. And what comes next is really up to us in our communities, and around our efforts. So one of the things that it's super exciting that a lot of the partners that we're working with that are doing right now is a Public School Strong campaign, which is basically a campaign to very aligned with what you all are doing at Defense of Democracy, and we're excited to find ways to collaborate. And what it's doing is it's training folks to go to school board meetings as a first step. So if what people should do, Trump gets elected or Harris gets elected, be able to build teams, join teams if they're already there, join groups that are already there, to start getting organized at the school district level. It's a great thing. People are like, what can I do? Every one of us lives in a school district. One of the great things about public education, we all can have teams, and we're all stakeholders in what happens there. And what happens there, one great example of how getting engaged and getting organized in your community can be part of something bigger. So many decisions get made on a local level. They're important to engage in. But in Tennessee, where they're building public schools strong across the state, they ended up having a big fight because they had a governor's universal voucher bill. With states all over the country, there'll be that on referendums in Nebraska and Colorado and Kentucky. But so this issue is being now also pushed in lots of legislatures, as many of your listeners know. And in Tennessee, they went to their school boards with Public School Strong, the School Board Association, the Tennessee Education Association, others, inviting school boards to take a resolution against the universal voucher bill. And so over 70 communities came out. So they do their local work, but they can also be advocates for and a stakeholder in these state decisions. And they helped defeat the voucher bill. And while they did so, they got more organized on their local level for future fights, for the school board, for other things. And so that to us is exactly, it's a building block of democracy. It's a building block for us to be able to fight for justice, advance equity in our communities, is by getting organized at our public schools.
Go ahead, Glenn. Yeah, let's hear what you got to say.
I was literally saying that's beautiful. I started with a quote from Vincent Harding, a civil rights activist, and it's one of the things that I maybe as we're thinking about next week is worth coming back to. He has another quote that says, "I'm a citizen of a country that does not exist yet." And I think, what happens next week is, for all of us, is that we have to continue to work together to imagine that country. And we do that with our, friends and neighbors in the way that James was named. And we take action. And I think, I hope for everybody, because I know there's a lot of anxiety, but for those of us who are deeply committed to building that just multiracial democracy, I hope, regardless of what happens next week, that we take a pause, and then the following week we get back to the work of building the world that we all want to live in.
I love that. I do. And I think that's my message too to the listeners is there is work to be done. If you can give an hour a month or 2 hours a month or a couple hours a week, I think that it's gone beyond the days. And again, for some of us, these days have never existed, but it's gone beyond the days where you could pretend that you didn't need to get involved because it would be taken care of. Those days are done. We need to work together. We need to collaborate, and we need to put our talents and our time and our energy into what is needed right now to protect our country and our democracy. I always like to end the show on a positive note. Okay. So I would love to hear, and I think I'll hear from both of you, but, starting with James, if you could think of something that you're looking forward to, this could be something personal, but this could be also something that is on the horizon for your organization to share with our listeners.
Well, thank you so much, Karen. And thank you, everyone who's tuning into Defense of Democracy's show and all the work that you do. I know the only reason why you'd be coming to this show is because you're trying to figure out these questions. How do we get our communities united so we can defend democracy? And we're all, worried when we see these like hate-filled rallies. We see like how can we be in this situation? So thank you for always ending your show, Karen, on this note, because it is that world that we're trying to isn't born yet, that Glenn is you're talking about is absolutely possible, because we see glimpses of it all the time. And see glimpses of people coming together and being able to achieve it. And I have my kids are right now a ninth grader and a seventh grader, and they're in the public schools, and they're watching the news like all of us, and they're wondering about where things could go. And it's just exciting to see so many students starting to get involved. One thing in particular I just wanted to highlight, I mentioned Public School Strong. In North Carolina, there has been an effort around Public School Strong voters, which essentially people have been building out like what they're calling in North Carolina an education electorate, trying to help make sure that happens in a powerful way in North Carolina. And they have elections up and down the ballot from now it's from president to governor to state superintendent for public education and school boards. And it's incredible to see that multi-generational coalition coming together fighting for their school. So I'm excited to learn lessons with what happened in North Carolina, and see the work that everyone here is going to be doing in their communities.
Thank you, James. Glenn, what are you looking forward
Love
to?
that, James. Spending more time with family, just to James' point, as we sort of head into the holiday seasons. But what I'm excited about at work is November 20th, so in like 2.5 weeks, we hold our big biannual conference, Facing Race, and we are going to be getting together with 4,000 of our closest friends and family in St. Louis. And I'm just deeply inspired. In this moment, it is folks from local government. It is folks from community organizing. It is literally people from across the country who are committed to this idea of building a just multiracial democracy, coming together to talk about what we're learning, and what's possible moving forward, and what we need to be engaged in. And excited about bringing together folks we've been working with to heal together at the conference itself. So I'm always inspired when other people are inspired. So I'm very much looking forward to that.
I love that. Well, James and Glenn, thank you so much for joining the show. Thank you for all the work you're doing. I know there's no way to calculate the amount of hours that goes into what you're doing, mobilizing communities around the country. I deeply appreciate you being here, and I look forward to additional work with you in the future.
Thank you, Karen.
Thanks, Karen. Thanks for all your work.